but I am on the shoulders of giants. Like all of these people have done it ahead of me, so I can learn. You were still relatively the early days of podcasts when you were doing it. So what was it like to develop a style at that time into what it became? Like, what was your process?
Yeah. It really was. I mean, what you're talking about, standing on the shoulder of giants, like a direct influence on me was like Mark Maron, the stand-up comedian who obviously does a very popular podcast. I really, I've always been fascinated by the fact that, I mean, even though, hardcore and punk in, the year of our Lord 2023 is the, biggest thing since sliced bread, like I've never could anticipate where we're at now. But
Right.
even from a press perspective, I was always frustrated by the fact that it's just like, it felt like everybody's little brother, whether it was like, emo, indie rock, hardcore punk, like it always felt off to the side. And so I looked at what Mark Maron was doing in his interviewing style and the way that he was obviously engaging with guests, high caliber people, that are like world famous or what have you. I was like, I want to do some version of that for punk and hardcore, independent music in general, because I felt like no one was having these conversations. So I definitely saw that space and I was like, whether or not I actually achieve that, like, I don't care. I'm going to obviously try it. So developing the style was looking at what interested me and transfixed me to those conversations and taking elements of that where it's like, okay, I want you to learn about this person from a sort of biographical perspective, understanding where they come from, understanding what their childhood is, understanding how they got introduced to this style of music, why they still care about it, like just all of those kind of, even though they're like some basic pieces of information, it is building a context for that person. Because I think that, in the age of obviously the digital internet that we all live in now, everything is devoid of context. You could look at a video from a person, you can listen to a record from a band or a particular song. You don't have any backup for that. And so I felt like it was really important for me to build that context around people where it's like, whether or not you like a person's art or a band, I could care less. Like, it doesn't matter to me. It matters to me that you understand where it's like, oh, wow, like that person has a very similar experience to me or has a similar, discovery point for punk or hardcore or whatever. Or like they were super into, riding horses or whatever. Like all of these weird things that all of us get introduced to as kids and then, maybe carry through into our adult life. It's painting that broad picture of a person that we all are attracted to these, weird subcultures and small rooms and all of these things that we hold so dear. But why is it? And why is it that we carry it forward so often? And the people that do stay involved, that they care about it probably even more deeply than they did when they first discovered it. Because even though there's that satiation, that the idea of collecting all these bands and like finding all this information, like you're just drinking from a fire hose. And then once you're an adult and you obviously have your tastes, more calcified than they are, you then look back fondly and you're just like, oh, that really was meaningful. And I still am caring about this, even though theoretically I should have aged out by a certain point. But I think it was important for me to, again, build that context around people. So it is a time capsule of that person at that particular moment, but it will really, like that one conversation and then maybe listening to the record and maybe listening to, another interview or whatever, will paint a very clear picture of who this person is and why they care about.
So going to like the consistency of it, and that's like one of the things. So for people who don't run podcasts, it can seem like it's like, oh, you have a conversation with somebody, put it on, but it's like so much work. And I'm really fortunate because I have a team. I believe you do everything yourself. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
So
Yep.
like all the editing, all the booking, all the reach out, all of it, right?
Yep.
So my business or my podcast is an outcropping of my business.
Yep.
And it makes logical sense for us to do it. And it's certainly not something that we make money at, but it helps share stories of like business, leadership, creativity, all those things. And it really ties back into the business well. So anytime that we get burnt out on it, we're like, oh, we have a reason to do it. It makes sense. It makes sense for the business.
Yep.
On your side, you've been in this podcast for 11 years and it's a lot of work. You've got a family, you've got a career. So 2 questions, handle them in whatever order you want. Why? Why now still? Especially when you're like, hey, maybe like conceptually, I'm supposed to be, I should have already aged out of this thing.
Of course.
So why?
Yep.
And then also, how are you keeping the quality up? Because the quality is so consistent and is getting better in terms of guests, but also just like the willingness to just have good conversations in a way that's true to you is always there. So whatever order you want, those two questions.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think I'll tackle the why. I mean, frankly, over time, it has become easier. So this is kind of answering both questions. Because the podcast is now a quantifiable commodity, i.e., people know what it is. I can consistently book guests and where people come to me. I don't have to be as proactive leaning on my friend group where it's like, hey, do you want to do this or whatever? I still do that, but there is a large amount where it's of people that are incoming, whether it's like press or PR being like, oh, hey, we know this would be a great fit. So like, let's do this. So it has made it easier. I think the why to it really, because there has been an outcropping of so many other, obviously, music, hardcore related podcasts. And there's different lanes that all these can exist in, whether it's like, Jeremy's podcast. Like, I mean, I've known him since he was a teenager, and watching him do what he does, it's very cool and meaningful because he is having conversations. They're more centered around, obviously, the first experiences. And I pull on a little of those threads in my show, but it's like people can listen to both of those and get something out of it completely different as they would like, listening to the guys in Hard Lore, where it's like, that's just all about tomfoolery and like them hanging out talking about fast food or whatever. And even though there is an intersection of the two subject matters that we cover, we could not be different from one another. And so I like to still hold on to what it is that I feel is valuable about the conversations that I'm having and just documenting them, and frankly keeping my head down and just being like, oh yeah, like this isn't work for me. This is all fun. And the fact that I can have conversations as diverse as I do, where I can bring people on that may not on the surface have any idea that there's a connectivity between like punk and hardcore and what it is that they do in the real world. The fact that I can pull these people in and be like, hey, Roman Mars, host of 99% Invisible, like one of my favorite podcasts, that, has like won so many awards. Like I noticed that he like would sprinkle in some references to like, punk, whatever. I was like, this dude probably knows what's up. And then reaching out to him and having him like literally on the podcast being like, you know what, like I haven't said this in like, 15, 20 years, but he's like, I think I'm straight edge. I was like, yeah, so like you are, like you don't drink, like, yeah. And so, but like no one talks to him about that because people just want to talk to him about architecture and the subject matter of his podcast. And so again, the why, like there's still, because I have left the door open in regards to, I can have conversations with kind of anybody that I find interesting as long as there's that connective tissue there. Because there's been so many times that I've been pitched people where it's like, oh, here's this person that is obviously going to be, a highly trafficked guest or whatever, but I don't feel like there's anything there. I'm really, really not going to like, square peg, round hole it, because I haven't actually gone through with any of that, because I know if there's ever a voice in my head that says that, where it's like, that's probably not going to be good. I'm like, okay, I got to listen to that, even though it'd be like, oh dude, this could get the most social media shares or likes or whatever. I'm like, I can't let that cloud my vision of the fact that I'm like really might be pulling at strings, and like 20 minutes into a conversation, I want to pull the ripcord because I'm like, this sucks. This is terrible. I got to get out of here. And I never want to be in that position. And so being able to listen to that voice in my head and understand the why of what I'm doing is really meaningful for me to still continue to keep doing it. Cause like, to your point, like I don't need to anymore. It's like, yeah, being able to still do this and, some 500 episodes later and still find interesting people to talk to and get, like, as a random example, it's like Eugene Robinson, he sings for this band called Oxbow, like, very big in the Hydra Head Records world of the 2000s or whatever. It's like, I'm gonna have a conversation with him, tomorrow. And it's like, this is a dude who's like, I mean, he's lived a life, like, he's written a book on like fighting people in the streets or whatever. It's just like, this is a guy where I would never interact with him besides maybe watching his band, which I have in the past, but he has a DIY background. But he's also worked in media for the past 10 or 15 years. And so being able to have these conversations with people like that, it's like I love to have those. And like until I feel like I've literally run at the end of my rope of like, oh man, I feel like I don't have anybody to talk to. Or it's like if I have said this to myself where if I literally am like week to week, I'm like scrambling for a guest that never need to be in that spot. I'm literally usually always like a month to 2 months ahead of interviews to be able to publish to where I feel completely confident and like able to manage all the workload plus everything else that I do in my life.